Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. In 2003, my parents had saved enough money to build a modest ranch house in the suburbs. First Community Bank approved the mortgage and signed a contract to provide Mike the funds to build the house. Mike, we soon discovered, had taken on too many projects across town, leaving his incompetent crew to handle the actual construction. "Don't worry, Mrs. Carter, we're professionals," he'd say whenever my mom called him about delays. The build dragged on endlessly, with countless mistakes requiring demolition and reconstruction. We're not talking about minor issues like mismatched paint or crooked molding. The architect had failed to properly erase a line on the blueprints, and the construction crew built a wall straight through the master bathroom shower stall. "Ma'am, you might want to be careful with those kitchen cabinets," one worker mumbled to my mother. "They're just held up with a couple roofing nails through the drywall." The three-car garage entrance somehow ended up facing our living room instead of the street, and that was just the beginning. When Mr. Peterson, the bank's inspector, arrived for the final walkthrough, my parents intercepted him in the driveway. "We can't approve this work," my dad said firmly. Peterson turned red-faced. "Do you know how much money the bank has already paid for this?" he snapped, storming toward the front entrance. He grabbed the door handle and pulled, only to have the entire door assembly, frame and all, crash down on top of him. It hadn't even been properly secured to the frame. The bank summoned Mike, who finally showed up to oversee the work himself. "Look, these things happen in construction," he said dismissively, but Mike proved just as inept as his crew. My parents continued refusing to sign off. My mother was stuck in a cramped rental with 2 young kids while my father worked double shifts during this nightmare. Throughout the ordeal, Mike and the bank treated them with contempt, bullying my mom whenever my dad wasn't around and lying to both of them about progress. What should have been an exciting milestone became a source of constant stress. I remember finding my mom crying in the kitchen more than once. Finally, the bank issued an ultimatum about foreclosure, while Mike threatened legal action for breach of contract since the bank had frozen his payments. My weary parents sought help from attorney David Martinez. They detailed everything: the plumbing disasters, electrical hazards, botched tiling, the whole catastrophe. Though terrified about costs, they had no choice but to fight. David listened sympathetically, but my dad said he could read defeat in the attorney's expression as he reviewed their documentation. Then suddenly, David's face lit up. "Let's get everyone in a room," he said. "First thing tomorrow." The next morning, my parents, David Peterson, the bank's lawyer Mike, and Mike's attorney gathered at First Community Bank. Before anyone else could speak, David announced, "My clients have decided they no longer want this house. Please remove it from their property." The others burst out laughing. "Remove it? Are you out of your mind?" Mike's attorney scoffed. David dramatically placed a deed on the conference table. "My clients own this land outright. They no longer desire the house. Remove it from their property immediately." Mike's attorney gaped at the deed, then at his client. "You built on land you don't own?" The bank's lawyer whirled on Peterson. "You approved financing without securing the land?" Peterson stammered. I assumed." "As stated," David said calmly, "you're trespassing. I expect the structure removed and the property restored to its original condition without delay." Dad still chuckles about the stunned expressions around that table. The bank could foreclose on a house that would soon be demolished, losing everything. They had no claim to the land. Mike stood to lose his investment plus demolition costs, and the bank would demand repayment of their portion. Sure, they could pursue my parents, but foreclosure would only damage their credit. Losing the down payment would hurt, but accepting the house meant spending tens of thousands fixing everything from foundation to roof. The bank knew from their own paperwork that my parents couldn't afford that. The tone changed instantly. "Mrs. Carter, this is clearly just a misunderstanding," Peterson said nervously. "We value your business." The house was properly rebuilt to exact specifications at no additional cost to my parents, though at considerable expense to Mike. My parents signed the mortgage, Mike received his final payment, barely breaking even, and Peterson was terminated. And David? He gained a legendary story to share with colleagues for decades to come. For those questioning this account, remember 2003 was over 20 years ago. Banking practices were different then, especially at smaller suburban institutions. Regulations existed but weren't as stringent, and close-knit communities often operated on handshakes and trust. Some might argue not much has changed. Yes, they really built through a shower stall. I've even omitted how one of the electricians left his tool belt inside a wall cavity, but the drywall crew said moving it wasn't their job and just sealed it in. I don't know where Mike found these workers, but they were truly something special, S. The next one is an entitled People's Story. I never thought I'd be writing this, but 2 weeks ago, I, 29F, was supposed to get married to my now ex-fiancé James, 32M. Instead, I'm single, living in my house, thank God, and dealing with the aftermath of what turned into the most dramatic day of my life. Some background. James and I had been together for 3 years before getting engaged. We met through mutual friends at a local brewery, and things progressed naturally from there. He was charming, had a good job in finance, and seemed like a genuinely kind person. Looking back now, there were red flags I chose to ignore, but we'll get to those. I bought my house 2 years ago before James and I got engaged. It's a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman-style home in a great neighborhood that I worked incredibly hard to afford. I saved for years while living with roommates, got promoted twice at my job as a software developer, and finally managed to make my dream of homeownership come true. This house represents everything I've worked for, and I'm incredibly proud of it. When James and I got engaged last year, we decided he would move in with me since my house was bigger and in a better location than his apartment. He insisted on paying rent, which I thought was fair, and things were going well. His parents, however, were a different story. From the moment they found out about our engagement, Martha and George, his parents, started making comments about how family-oriented their son was and how they'd always dreamed of living close to their future grandchildren. At first I thought nothing of it. They lived about 3 hours away, and I figured they were just expressing normal parent feelings. Then the hints started dropping. During wedding planning, Martha would casually mention how they were getting older and how families should stick together. George would talk about how they were thinking of selling their house and moving closer to us. Again, I didn't think much of it because they never directly asked anything of us. The wedding planning itself was stressful enough. Martha had opinions about everything. The venue, the flowers, the cake, you name it. I tried to be accommodating where I could, but I stood my ground on things that were important to me. James always sided with his mother, saying things like, "It would mean so much to her," or, "Let's just keep the peace." I should have seen this as a warning sign. A week before the wedding, James started acting strange. He was distant, constantly on his phone and having hushed conversations with his parents. When I asked what was wrong, he'd brush it off as wedding stress or work stuff. The morning of our wedding day, I was in the bridal suite with my bridesmaids getting ready. Everything was going according to plan. My hair and makeup were done, my dress fit perfectly, and despite the normal wedding day jitters, I was excited to marry the man I loved. Then, about 2 hours before the ceremony, James asked to speak with me privately. My maid of honor, Lily, protested that it was bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the wedding, but James insisted it was important. I should have listened to Lily. James came into the bridal suite looking nervous but determined. He was already in his tuxedo, and under different circumstances, I would have thought he looked handsome. Instead, what came next made my blood run cold. "Honey," he said, taking my hands in his, "you know how important family is to me, right?" I nodded, already feeling uneasy about where this was going. "Well, Mom and Dad have been thinking about their future, and they've decided they want to move closer to us. Actually, they want to move in with us." I pulled my hands away. "What do you mean, move in with us?" "James, we never discussed this." He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, that's not all. They've been looking at retirement options, and they've realized they'd feel more secure if they had some assets in their name. So we thought it would make sense if we transferred the house to them." I stared at him. Surely this was a joke. "Transfer my house? The house that I bought? To your parents?" "Our house," he corrected me. "Once we're married, it'll be our house, and they're not asking for much, just the deed. We'd still live there, of course. They just want the security of knowing they have something to fall back on in their retirement." I felt like I was in some sort of twisted nightmare. "James, that house is my biggest asset. I worked for years to buy it. I'm not just going to give it away." "You're not giving it away," he argued, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "You're ensuring our family's future. Mom and Dad have already talked to their lawyer about the paperwork. We can sign everything right after the ceremony." That's when it hit me. They'd planned this. They'd actually prepared legal documents to take my house, expecting me to sign them on my wedding day. "You want me to sign over my house on our wedding day? Were you ever going to discuss this with me beforehand?" My voice was shaking. "We're discussing it now," he said, as if this was a perfectly reasonable conversation to have 2 hours before our wedding. Look, I know it seems sudden, but Mom and Dad need an answer before the ceremony. They've already started packing up their house. I felt sick. They've started packing? Without even asking me? James, this is insane. It's not insane, it's family, he snapped. This is what families do. They take care of each other. Mom and Dad took care of me my whole life, and now it's our turn to take care of them. By giving them my house? I was practically shouting now. A house they contributed nothing to, that they didn't help pay for? Lower your voice, he hissed. People will hear you. Good, I shot back. Let them hear. Let them know that you and your parents plan to basically steal my house. The door burst open and Martha came rushing in with George right behind her. My bridesmaids tried to follow, but George blocked the door. What's all this fuss about? Martha asked, her voice syrupy sweet. James, dear, I thought we agreed you'd handle this calmly. Handle this? I laughed hysterically. Was this whole wedding just a setup to get my house? Now, dear, Martha said, crossing the room to pat my arm. I jerked away from her touch. You're being dramatic. We're just trying to keep the family together. George and I aren't getting any younger, and we want to be close to our future grandchildren. Future grandchildren? I repeated. We haven't even gotten married yet, and you're already planning to move in and take over my house for children that don't exist? Well, they will exist, Martha said firmly. James has always wanted a big family, and with us living there, you'll have built-in childcare. It's perfect. I looked at James, who was nodding along with everything his mother said. In that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time, not as the man I thought I loved, but as someone who had never really grown up, who would always put his parents' wishes above everything else. No, I said quietly. What was that, dear? Martha asked. I said no. No to all of it. No to giving you my house, no to you moving in, and, I turned to James, no to marrying you. The room went deadly quiet. You can't be serious, James finally said. Everything's planned. Everyone's here. You can't just say no. Watch me. I started taking off my veil. This wedding is off. Now listen here. George stepped forward, his face red. We've spent a lot of money on this wedding. You can't just... I'll pay you back, I cut him off. Every penny. But I'm not marrying someone who would try to pressure me into giving away my home on my wedding day. You selfish little... Martha started. But I'd had enough. I pushed past them and threw open the door. My bridesmaids were right outside, along with several other wedding guests who had apparently heard the commotion. The wedding is off, I announced loudly. James and his parents tried to force me to sign over my house to them as a wedding gift. They already had the paperwork prepared. The gasps and murmurs from the gathered crowd were immediate. Lily, my maid of honor, immediately stepped to my side, while my other bridesmaids formed a protective circle around me. We need to get you out of here, Lily whispered. My car's right outside. As we started moving toward the exit, James came running after us. You're making a huge mistake, he shouted. You're throwing away our future over a house. I spun around, fury giving me courage. No, James, I'm throwing away a future with someone who clearly doesn't respect me or my boundaries. Someone who conspired with his parents to pressure me into giving away my biggest asset on my wedding day. By this point, more guests had gathered in the hallway, including my parents. My dad looked ready to commit murder, while my mom was already on the phone, presumably calling our relatives to tell them the wedding was off. It's not like that, James protested, looking around nervously at all the witnesses. We just wanted to keep the family together. Mom and Dad would have let us live there. Let us live there? I repeated incredulously. Let us? In my house? The house I bought with my money? The one I spent years saving for? Martha pushed through the crowd. Now everyone, let's calm down. This is clearly just wedding day jitters. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out, my father interrupted, stepping between Martha and me. My daughter said no, the wedding is off. I suggest you start calling your guests. But the reception, Martha sputtered. The catering, the band, everything's paid for. Keep it all, I said. Have a party. Celebrate the fact that your plan to steal my house failed. I don't care, I'm leaving. Lily started guiding me toward the exit again, but James made one last attempt. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. You're not thinking clearly. Just calm down and... He never finished that sentence because my father physically removed his hand from my arm. Touch my daughter again, Dad growled, and we'll have a very different kind of problem. What happened next was a blur. Lily and my bridesmaids hustled me out to her car while my parents dealt with James and his family. I remember hearing Martha wailing dramatically about how I was breaking her baby's heart and George threatening legal action over the wedding costs. Once we were in Lily's car, the reality of what had just happened hit me. I started shaking uncontrollably. "Oh God," I gasped. "Oh God, I just called off my wedding." "You did the right thing," Lily assured me, pulling out of the venue parking lot. "Those people are crazy. Who tries to steal someone's house as a wedding gift? But all those people, the money, the plans." "Listen to me," Lily said firmly. "Money can be replaced, plans can be changed. But if you had gone through with that wedding, you would have lost your house and your independence. They showed you who they really are today. Believe them." She was right, of course, but that didn't make the next few days any easier. The aftermath of calling off a wedding is messy, to say the least. My parents handled most of it, bless them. They contacted guests, dealt with vendors, and managed the logistics of returning gifts. The story spread quickly through our social circle. Most people were horrified on my behalf, but some of James's friends and family members started a smear campaign, painting me as a selfish bridezilla who cared more about material possessions than family. 3 days after the non-wedding, I received a certified letter from a lawyer representing James and his parents. They were demanding reimbursement for their portion of the wedding expenses, claiming I had broken the contract of engagement without just cause. I took the letter straight to my own lawyer, who laughed out loud when she read it. "They're trying to sue you for calling off a wedding because they tried to coerce you into signing over your house? This is rich." She helped me draft a response that not only denied their claims, but also threatened counteraction for attempted coercion and fraud. We included texts and emails from James and his parents that showed their premeditation in planning to spring this on me at the wedding. The response from their lawyer came quickly. They were dropping all demands for reimbursement. Apparently, when faced with actual legal scrutiny, James and his parents weren't so eager to have their actions examined in court. But the drama wasn't over. A week after the non-wedding, I discovered that James still had a key to my house. I knew this because I came home from work to find Martha and George in my living room, collecting James's things. I immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, Martha and George tried to claim they had permission to be there because James lived there too. Fortunately, I had all the documentation showing I was the sole owner, and James had never been more than a tenant. They were escorted out, and I had all the locks changed that same day. The next day, I received a barrage of angry texts from James. "James, I can't believe you called the cops on my parents." Me, "I can't believe they broke into my house." James, "They didn't break in, I gave them my key." Me, "Which you no longer had any right to use. That's called breaking and entering." James, "They were just getting my stuff." Me, "Your stuff will be packed and ready for pickup with a police escort present. Don't contact me again." I blocked his number after that, but the messages kept coming from different numbers. Burner phones, I assume. Each one more desperate than the last. "You're making a huge mistake. Mom and Dad are heartbroken. We can work this out. Just give us another chance." The house would be better off in more experienced hands anyway. That last one really got me. More experienced hands? Like I was some child who couldn't handle property ownership? I saved every message as evidence, just in case. My parents were incredibly supportive through all of this. Dad helped me install security cameras around the house, and Mom stayed with me for a few days until I felt secure again. They were furious about what James and his parents had tried to do. "I always thought there was something off about that boy," Mom admitted one evening. "The way he deferred to his mother on everything, it wasn't healthy." "I should have seen it sooner," I said. There were so many red flags. "Like what?" Mom asked. I started counting them off on my fingers. He never contradicted his parents, ever. He always took their side in arguments, even when they were clearly wrong. He'd cancel our plans if his mom called and wanted to do something. He consulted them about major decisions before talking to me. God, how did I miss all this? "Because you were in love," Mom said gently. "And sometimes love makes us blind to things we don't want to see." A month after the non-wedding, I ran into James's cousin Amy at the grocery store. Instead of avoiding me like most of his family had been doing, she actually approached me. "I'm so sorry about everything," she said. "I want you to know that not all of us agree with what they tried to do." She then told me something interesting. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Martha and George had tried something like this. James's previous serious girlfriend had broken up with him when they tried to pressure her into letting them invest in her small business. Their idea of investing had involved taking majority ownership. They've always been like this, Amy explained. They think everything should belong to the family, meaning them. They've been living beyond their means for years, and now they're desperate for assets they can control. This information made me feel both better and worse. Better because it confirmed I'd made the right decision. Worse because I realized how close I'd come to being trapped in that family's dysfunction forever. The story might have ended there, but about 6 weeks after the non-wedding, I received an unexpected email from James's younger sister, Mia. Unlike the rest of her family, Mia had always seemed more grounded. We hadn't been close, but we'd been friendly. The email was eye-opening. I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone in our family, but I need to tell you something. What they tried to do to you, they're trying to do it to me now. Mom and Dad are pressuring me to sign over my condo to them for estate planning purposes. They keep saying it's what family does for each other. James is backing them up, of course. I told them no, and now they're threatening to cut me off completely. I never realized how toxic this was until I saw how they treated you. Thank you for standing up to them. It gave me the courage to do the same. I wrote back to Mia, offering my support and suggesting some resources for dealing with manipulative family members. We've actually become friends now, bonding over our shared experiences with her family's entitled behavior. 3 months after the non-wedding that wasn't, I received another interesting piece of news through the grapevine. James had started dating someone new, a woman who still lived with her parents and, more importantly, had a trust fund. Martha and George were apparently thrilled with this new development. History repeats itself, Lily commented when I told her. Want to bet they're already planning how to get their hands on that trust fund? Not my circus, not my monkeys, I replied, using one of my mom's favorite sayings. I'm just grateful I got out when I did. And I was grateful. The whole experience, while traumatic, taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for myself and recognizing red flags in relationships. It also showed me who my true friends were and how supportive my own family could be. My house, the source of all this drama, is still mine. I've done some renovations since then, painted the walls, updated the kitchen, planted a garden. Each improvement feels like reclaiming the space as my own, erasing the memory of how close I came to losing it. Last week I was having dinner with my parents when Dad brought up the incident. You know, he said, I've never been prouder of you than I was that day. It takes real courage to walk away from a wedding, especially for the right reasons. Mom nodded in agreement. And to think they actually expected you to sign over your house as a wedding gift. The nerve of some people. Well, I said, raising my glass, here's to dodging bullets and keeping our homes. We all laughed and clinked glasses, but later that night, I reflected on how differently things could have turned out. If I'd been more desperate to get married, less financially secure, or more susceptible to pressure, I might have given in to their demands. The thought makes me shudder. I recently ran into one of James's friends at a local coffee shop. He awkwardly tried to avoid me, but I caught his eye and waved him over. Hey, I said. No hard feelings, okay? I know you were just supporting your friend. He shuffled uncomfortably. Actually, I wanted to tell you that you did the right thing. James and his parents, they're not doing so well. The new girlfriend's parents apparently hired a private investigator after they started making comments about her trust fund. They found out about what happened with you and the house thing. The relationship ended pretty quickly after that. I couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction at that. Not because I wished James ill, but because it confirmed that I'd made the right decision. Their pattern of behavior was finally catching up with them. As for me, I'm doing better than ever. My career is thriving, my house is truly my home, and I've even started dating again, very cautiously, and with a much better understanding of boundaries and red flags. Sometimes I think about what Martha said about keeping the family together, and I realize how backwards their thinking was. A real family doesn't try to take things from you. They help you grow and support your independence. They celebrate your achievements instead of trying to claim them for themselves. The other day, I was working in my garden when a moving truck pulled up at the house next door. As I watched the new neighbors unload their belongings, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. It was an older couple moving in to be closer to their grandchildren. But unlike Martha and George, they'd bought their own house, right next door to their daughter's family. That's how it's supposed to work, I thought, everyone maintaining their own space while still being close enough to support each other. No manipulation, no demands, no entitled behavior, just family supporting family in a healthy way. Looking back now, I can honestly say that calling off that wedding was the best decision decision I've ever made. Sure, it was dramatic and messy and expensive, but it saved me from a lifetime of manipulation and boundary violations. My house is still my house, my life is still my life, and I'm stronger for having stood my ground. As for James and his parents, last I heard they're still living beyond their means and looking for their next opportunity. But that's not my problem anymore. I'm too busy enjoying my life, my home, and my freedom to worry about them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's just living well and being grateful for the bullets you managed to dodge. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.